friends, and welcome back to another video. It has been quite a while and I'm just so glad to be filming again. I think it's been about 3 weeks since I filmed last and it feels like much longer. This month has just been dragging and I think that has to do with school. It's been crazy, but I'm almost finished, just a few more months, and then hopefully I'll be filming more. Hopefully I'll be able to have a set schedule when I can film, but I'm so glad I managed to sit down and film a video today. And today I just want to share with you all some recommendations that I think are great to read during the cold winter days. I know winter looks a little bit different depending on where you are in the world, but here in Southern Ontario, winter really just gets started at the end of January and it just drags into March. So for me, winter is nowhere near over, unfortunately, but I try to find the beauty in every season, and it really helps me with, fighting seasonal depression and all of that. So for me, I just try to romanticize winter as much as possible through whatever means possible. So I love to go outside for a walk, and you would have seen the B-roll at the beginning. I went walking with my sisters, and it's just a fun way to embrace the season and to play in the snow and just kind of like relive our childhood, and we just had such a fun time. And then another way that I love to romanticize winter is by reading books that fit the season and that feel wintry. Even if the books themselves are not set in winter, there's just something about the story that lends itself well for this season. I have a really big pile of books here beside me, so I'm gonna go through each one, and I'm not gonna spend time talking about what the story is about, but I'll share why I personally think the books are great to read in the wintertime. I'm also not gonna share these books by genre or in any particular order. I'm just gonna pick each book off of the pile as I go. The first book I'd like to share is Footsteps in the Dark by Georgette Hare. Although this book has a very wintry cover, we're never told what season it's in, and you're never really given any descriptions as to what season it is. But this is a murder mystery, and it's set in this country house, and this group of siblings inherits this house from one of their ancestors. And so they move in and they find a murder victim, and the story just has both a cozy and a more sinister element to it. And just the flow of the story and the atmosphere makes it feel perfect to read on a cold winter night, even though it's not actually set in winter. At least it's not specified whether it is, but I think this book is perfect for the winter season. It's really funny, it has some great characters, and it's just a perfect book to cozy up with a hot cup of tea on a really cold winter night. So this is my first recommendation, and I actually read it in December of 2021, so I think that's another reason why I kind of associate it with winter, but would highly recommend. Next is a book that I shared in my Christmas book recommendations video, but I don't think you necessarily have to read it around the Christmas time, and that is Winter Solstice by Rosamund Pilcher. This book does have a section towards the end that is set around Christmas time, but the majority of this book is during the lead up to Christmas. And even though we're past Christmas, it is a very wintry book. It has a lot of descriptions of the weather, and this one I'm pretty sure is set in the 90s in England, and it's about a cast of characters and how their lives all intersect. And so this book really focuses on relationships and not so much on the plot. So it's not very fast paced, it's quite slow, but I think it's perfect for winter. It's called Winter Solstice, so I definitely would recommend for this season. Next is a book that is definitely not for everyone. It's quite heavy, very intense, and it has quite a bit of content that I'm personally not a fan of. But I explained why this book was so impactful for me when I read it a couple months ago, so I'll have that wrap up linked up above. But that book is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. There is a chapter in this story that is extremely wintry. It is just beautifully described. The season is just captured perfectly. I loved that chapter so much. This book is the quintessential dark academia book. So for me, dark academia really fits fall and winter, and I think this would be a really great read as well for the winter time. Just be aware that it is quite heavy and very intense. This next book is one that I think is just perfect for winter, and that is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. The characters in this book are extremely cold people. The book is very atmospheric and tragic and dark, and I think winter's a great time for a book like this, so I would recommend Wuthering Heights. It is hands down one of my favorite classics. I know it's not for everyone, but I personally adore it, and wintertime is the perfect time to read it. This next book is a historical fiction that is set here in Canada, which is really fun. I don't read a lot of books set in Canada, and that is At the Mountain's Edge by Genevieve Graham. Now, this book is actually set in the Yukon, which is one of our territories in Canada, and it's basically set in the late 1800s around the time of the gold rush, and there's a romance in it, and it's very cold and atmospheric as well, and it's Yukon. It snows a lot, there's mountains everywhere, It's a great story for the winter time. I find that in the winter, I really gravitate towards books that are slower paced and just more visceral and hard hitting, and stories that deal with, I guess, darker topics. And maybe that's just because I'm quite a seasonal reader and I kind of like to feel the mood of the season. And for winter, it definitely feels very dark sometimes. And so I really think that this book is also a great winter read, and that is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. It's historical fiction, and it's about Shakespeare's wife and child and some tragic circumstances that occurred. And this book is a very emotional read. Again, it's slower paced. It's not anything fast moving with an intense plot by any means, but I think it's great for winter time. It's the kind of story that I gravitate towards in the winter, so I just wanted to share it in this video as well. Another historical fiction, and I think you'll be able to tell by the cover why I'm recommending it, and that is The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn. This one is set during World War II, and our main character is a Russian sniper. I wouldn't say the book itself is full of winter and wintry descriptions, but our main character, she spends a lot of time on the battlefield and in forests, and there's just something about the story that feels cold, and it's so raw and real and brutal, and I really do gravitate towards stories like this in the winter time. So would recommend this as well. Next, I have all of the books by one author here because each of them is just so magical and whimsical, and they just fit the winter season. I think each of them is perfect to read during winter time, and I'm talking about all of Stephanie Garber's books. So we have the Carball Trilogy and then the Once Upon a Broken Heart duology. So for the Caraval Trilogy, it's not like the books themselves are set in winter, but they just have this aura, especially when our main characters end up in Caraval, which is kind of like a circus that shows up in different parts of the world that these books are set in. And just the way that the magic system is set up feels kind of on the darker side. It's not like this cutesy, whimsical kind of magic by any means. It's not like dark magic, but there's just something about it. And then for the duology, I don't think Once Upon a Broken Heart is the most wintry, but the Ballad of Never After definitely is. This book actually has quite a few scenes where it's snowing and it's cold, and this book is definitely a perfect wintry one. If I had time, I'd go back and binge the trilogy and then reread these as well throughout the winter. I think it would be so fun. A bit of a different book here. I have The Lost Spells by Robert Macfarlane, and all of the artwork is by Jackie Morris. And this is basically just a collection of poetry with watercolor art as well. The art itself is not all wintry, but it definitely has some spreads that are. And I just think that poetry is something that I also gravitate towards more so in the winter than any other season, and I don't know why that is exactly, but the poetry in this book is very simple, very straightforward, but it's so cozy, and the artwork just makes it so cozy. There are definitely some wintry ones. But I honestly adored this book and I need to give it a reread. Next up we have Wildwood Dancing, and this is a historical fantasy set in medieval Romania. And this one is set in a forest, and it's quite cold and gloomy and very atmospheric, very wintry. This one is one of the most magical stories I have ever read. The folklore and the creatures, the magical creatures in this story, it's just otherworldly. I loved it so much, and winter is the perfect season for this book. We also have Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys, and this book is set during World War II when the Soviets are basically taking over, I think it was Lithuania, Estonia, and a few other countries in Eastern Europe. The main family in the story, they're sent to a prison camp in northern Siberia. It is a very harrowing story, very emotional, but super impactful, and very wintry. One of my favorite fairy tale retellings that is set in a very wintry world is Hunted by Megan Spooner. And this one is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Beauty and the Beast is my favorite fairy tale, and I love when I find a good retelling, and this one is definitely a great one. It's a world inspired by Eastern Europe, and it is very cold and snows a lot. It's set in the woods as well, and it's just a beautiful story. It kept me spellbound the entire time, so I would definitely recommend this for the winter season. Next is a book from one of my favorite series ever, and that is The Long Winter from the Little House on the Prairie series. This is by Laura Ingalls Wilder. This is one of the middle books in this series, but I don't think it's a big deal if you just pick this one up and you haven't read the ones before. But this one is about the Ingalls family and their journey moving from state to state, and a lot of what they had to go through as pioneers in America. And I think the title and the cover of this book, it's very self-explanatory, so would highly recommend for the winter. This next book is actually one that I don't have a copy of. I don't own it, and I also wouldn't say I recommend it to everyone necessarily. I kind of feel similarly towards it as I did towards The Secret History. I wouldn't say it's for everyone, and I'm talking about The Bear and the Nightingale. This book I personally really loved. It just has so many elements that I love. It's historical fantasy set in medieval Russia. So Russia, it's cold, it's extremely atmospheric, the writing is beautiful, it's very character driven, but I think it's quite dark at the same time, and I'm not sure it's a book I would ever reread as much as I loved it the first time I read it. So again, it's a light recommendation. I'm not saying this book is for everyone because it definitely is not, but I personally really loved it, and if the elements of the story are things that wouldn't bother you, I would definitely say give it a try. It's one of the most wintry books I've ever read. All right, and the last two books I have here are actually books that I'm in the middle of, so I'm not quite finished them yet. The first one is The Golem and the Jinni by Helene Wecker. The cover of this book makes it feel like it's set in the winter, but it never specifies. Again, it's one of those books where you don't really know what season it is, and I don't think it really matters because the writing itself makes it feel like it could be set in the winter. It's very slow paced, and I would say this is historical magical realism. It's set in New York City in 1899, so just the turn of the 20th century. And we have two main characters. We have a golem and a jinni. So we have a female golem named Hava, and I think it's actually pronounced Hava, which I can't really do, but it's like the Jewish pronunciation. It has the strong, throaty sound to it. And then we have a male jinni who he is kind of Arabian. So this book is heavily inspired by both Jewish folklore and Arabian folklore. And I'm loving it. It is so beautifully written, so atmospheric, and it's quite slow paced, which I personally am okay with, especially in the winter time, and especially when the characters are very interesting. So this one I think is a great winter read as well, and I cannot wait to continue reading it. I'm about a third of the way through and I'm loving it. And then the very last book, I'm about a quarter of the way through, but I'm really enjoying it, and that is The Winter Sea by Susanna Kearsley. This is one that I'm buddy reading with Mitzi from Mitzi Reads and Writes. I'll have her channel linked below, and I'm really enjoying this book. It is set in Scotland, and even if it were set in the summer, to me, Scotland just feels like fall and winter. Anytime I read a book set in Scotland, it just doesn't feel summery to me, especially with all the rain and the gloomy weather, and just being with these characters in the Highlands, it feels like it should be read in the fall and winter. This one actually never told us what month it's set in, so again, I don't know if it's set in the winter, but it very much could be, and it definitely feels like it is. And it's a dual timeline, so our main timeline is about this girl. She's an author, and she starts writing this story, and it's like these characters come to life, but in a way that it's beyond just her imagination. And I'm pretty sure this is also tagged as magical realism, if I'm not mistaken. So I think there's definitely a magical element to this. And then we have our past timeline set in the 1700s around the Jacobite Rebellion. And so our main character from the present day, she's writing this story, and then the past timeline is this story that she's writing. This book is so interesting so far, and again, I'm only about a quarter of the way through, so not much has happened, but I love the characters already. This author really set the scene, and I love that it's set in Scotland. All right, everyone, so those are some books that I'd recommend to read during the winter season. I hope that you're able to find some wintry books to read in the remaining days before spring comes. We still have all of February, and depending on where you're from, some of March as well to read some wintry books. So I hope that at least one of these sounds interesting to you. Let me know if you've read any of them and what your thoughts are. And I'd also like some recommendations from all of you in the comments for some wintry books. Maybe I can fit one or two in before spring comes. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye.